Well, there's a look at small town Texas. Hot conditions, 92 degrees, and we're in the very last day of spring here. Tomorrow at 4:45 p.m. That's the solstice, and that's when we transition into summer. Let's take a look at the current map and see what's going on around the U.S. Pretty quiet weather pattern. We've got a frontal system in Missouri and Iowa there. That's been gradually moving to the east over the past couple of days, and that's bringing a cold front down into Oklahoma, where we have cool conditions and 60s at this hour. In the desert southwest, the tail end of the front is dissipating. Very strong radiational heating, eating away at the edges of that front there. It's continued hot in the eastern U.S. Syracuse has had some record heat there. In fact, it's their hottest June since 1934, I believe, 1934. They've had over 6 days of 88-degree weather, and last time I checked, they were up to 86 for today. And still seeing those 90s up there in Quebec and the Maritimes. What is that, 97? I think that's at Fredericton. They've been really hammered there by heat, and I don't see any 100-degree readings, but it is definitely another hot one. Here's a look at the 300 millibar conditions. This is up at about 30,000 feet near the top of the troposphere. This is showing the upper level flow, and let me move the graphic down so you can see the legend. And there it is. You can see the polar front jet well up to the north, affecting North Dakota and northern Minnesota. We can trace out the jet stream pattern from Washington, curving down into the Four Corners area, and then back up into that jet max, and then up and over into the Hudson Bay region. Now, usually we have a subtropical high covering much of the eastern U.S., but today you can see that cyclonic flow in place over the northeastern U.S., and that puts a low-pressure center there in Pennsylvania. And we can see that closed contour right there outlining the extent of that low-pressure area. There is a subtropical ridge covering the eastern part of Texas up into Missouri. There it is right there. It's a very small subtropical ridge. What do we usually have this time of year? Let's take a look at 10 years back. So here's a graphic from exactly 10 years ago. This shows a very typical weather pattern. So this is a North American map, and you can see the U.S. right there. And what's interesting is under the ridge right here, very weak winds. And looking at the actual plots, looks like about 10 to 20 knots there, and just kind of a very shallow anticyclonic flow. And if we go forward over the next week, you can see there's very little change. Much of the southeastern U.S. underneath that subtropical ridge there, very light winds aloft, and that pattern just kind of holds on almost semi-permanently. We do have a much different picture today, and let's go up to the weekend, and you can see we actually have a pretty progressive flow, unlike 10 years ago. Very strong wave moving through the central U.S., kind of linking up a little bit with this low off the east coast, and we just get this wavy pattern here dominating weather across much of the U.S. And this time of year, with the type of heat that we have, the moisture, any strong flow, any progressive pattern, any jet nearby, even segments like that, that can be significant. So whenever we see that, we have to take that into account for our forecast. And if we run this forward, you can see this jet max coming into the central U.S. That's going to be significant this time of year. And as a whole, even though we don't see the jet stream in the central U.S. on Wednesday, the broad 30 to 40 knot flow extends over much of the southern plains. And that's significant. So don't just look at the jet stream axis, the jet streaks. look at the wind as a whole and make sure you're looking for patterns like that. Where's the subtropical ridge next week? Again, this is Wednesday. It's out over the desert southwest. We don't really see it across the southeastern U.S. Out around Phoenix, that's kind of painting a high-pressure area covering that region, so we would expect that area to be pretty hot around midweek. Let's take a tour of weather around the U.S. this afternoon, starting with the southwestern U.S. It's clear. Very little happening. It looks like the fires are still going there east of Mesa, but doesn't look quite as bad as yesterday. So maybe they've made some progress, hopefully. The Mogollon Rim, that stands out right there. That's right on the edge of the high plateau of the Four Corners area. And that tends to be an area where we see heavy rain during the summer, during the monsoon. Also, the San Joaquin Valley, that stands out. It's clear. And on the eastern side, there's the Sierra Nevada. Hopefully some of you guessed that correctly. Also, we see the marine layer. Yeah, that's been inland a little bit. Let's run that back. See that during the morning? We tend to see the marine layers sometimes come inland in the summer, and it's kind of cloudy and foggy, all the way to San Bernardino. Little tongue twister there. And that eventually burns off as the day goes on. The high deserts of the western U.S., not much going on there, but we do see cirrus moving towards the southeast. So we've got northwesterly flow aloft, and that would indicate ridging out to the west and troughing out to the east. Looks like there's been some improvement in the weather in Washington and Oregon. That upper level system has moved off to the east, and of course we're getting a lot of towering cumulus and cumulonimbus in that region, northern Rockies and out to the west. Looks like some ridging moving in, and then the next system lurking right offshore with high clouds, mostly cirriform along the coast. And still looks a little bit stormy there in Wyoming and Montana. We do notice that the cutoff flow that we've had a couple days ago, that's kind of moved on off, and we've got kind of like an open circulation. Things look like they're moving progressively west to east, but it looks like there is troughing, cold conditions in the mid and upper levels with strong surface heating. That's going to mean lots of convection, and that's pretty much what we got going on in that area. In the Central Plains, a couple of systems going on. One is this huge MCS in Oklahoma. Kind of rare to see that going on during the middle of the day. Usually that's a nighttime phenomena, but yeah, that's being fed moisture from the Red River, and that's keeping it going. Another interesting feature is this other MCS. It's a little bit more elevated and a little bit more broken. That's coming off the Front Range. Now, typically this time of year, we see storms forming on the Palmer Divide and on the higher mountain ranges. This appears to be generated from maybe your front and maybe an upper level wave coming through. Doesn't seem to be attached to the terrain like we typically see. So we would look to the mid and upper level charts to see what's going on with that. It does look like some upslope right in this area. You can see the transverse banding of the stratocumulus right there, the cloud streets and the more unstable air flowing northwestward. That's a pretty classic upslope pattern, and these storms here would fit right in with that. Those storms right there on the Raton Mesa. Texas has some action going on here and there. Well, for one, the sea breeze is moving inland. We can see that right there. And that's laying down some outflow pools along the length of that boundary. Also looks like the dry line is out in West Texas, and I would probably put that right around this area here. You can see the transition between the low cloud forms in eastern and central Texas and the higher cumulus cloud forms out to the west. These storms out here, those are forming on the Davis Mountains, and the storms out southwest of Lubbock, that's probably some better moisture working onto the high terrain, and it's possible that as those move eastward, they'll come into some better moisture and become a little bit more based on the low levels. The southeastern U.S. is still under northerly flow. You can see not only the elements are moving north to south, but also the anvils. So that's some deep northerly flow. Looks like the main upper level low is off to the northeast. Any sign of that cold front? Well, yesterday we know that that was kind of becoming stationary out in this area here. I don't really see that anymore. It's possible that could be it right there in Louisiana, but it's likely washed out by this point. There's the Ohio River Valley, definitely picking up more of the storms there, and we can see the circulation with that upper level low. Pretty much right in that area. It looks like it's around the Pittsburgh area, maybe into far western Maryland. Lots of thunderstorm activity. We know that this air mass is not really capped at all, so as soon as we get the surface heating, a lot of that moisture at the surface from evapotranspiration and advection comes into play. We get parcels that rapidly ascend into that cooler air in the mid-levels, and we get widespread thunderstorms across that area. In the Great Lakes, we have a weakening front pretty much bisecting that region. Michigan under warm conditions there, fair weather, and out to the east we've got cold air moving through Minnesota into northern Wisconsin. Looks like a few thunderstorms going up along the front, but this kind of looks to me like the moisture may be in somewhat scant supply. I'm probably thinking maybe 50s dew points with those kinds of mushy anvils. Is that in fact the case? Let's take a look. Yeah, I see it like a 54 there, I think. 61 around Ironwood, and yeah, the moisture is a little bit weak. And we have to go all the way down to Arkansas, Kentucky, and Ohio, and Detroit to find the deep 60s dew points. And in the northeastern U.S., looks like the weather is slowly deteriorating as that upper level system comes out of the Appalachians. So lots of cumulus and towering cumulus. Looks like even Ontario getting a little bit of the action. And interesting, looks like maybe one storm there near Mount Washington in New Hampshire and another just south of Montreal. So maybe some people are getting a bit of relief with that heat. Okay, let's get a look at our forecast over the weekend, and I'm going to start with the NAM and run this up to 21Z. This is a 9-hour forecast. It looks like the model is not really verifying with Oklahoma. There's a lot more storms there than the model indicates. However, it does break out some convection in the Texas Panhandle down to Lubbock. That becomes very strong. So that's something we're going to watch for tonight and see if that actually pans out. If that comes together, NAM is looking for that to propagate towards the Dallas-Fort Worth area by late evening. Then for tomorrow, let's see here. What do we got as far as boundaries? I guess there's probably the tail end of the front, maybe in this region here. Another section of the front. Looks like that kind of goes all the way up into Quebec and then goes out to the Maritimes. So anywhere south of that front, that's all going to be tropical air. All right, for tomorrow, starting out around midday, very difficult to find that front, and likely it's going to be masked by boundaries in parts of Texas and Oklahoma. So we're probably going to see some convection start getting fired up there in the afternoon. So I'm not sure if we're going to get convection with that. Let's run this forward to Sunday. Looks like our frontal system coming together in the Great Lakes. Kind of picking up a wave, I guess, that moves out of the Kansas City area and up the boundary. Cold air lurking up to the north in the Canadian prairies, and then by later in the day on Sunday, looks like some strong return flow picking up in Texas. I think there's still some ridging covering the area since we're not breaking out much in the way of thunderstorms. And up in Canada, there's that frontal system right there. That's about the only real action going on, and maybe a very weak cold front coming together in the Salt Lake City and northern Nevada area, kind of separating this cooler air to the north from the warm desert air in the Four Corners and Arizona. And getting to the very end of the run, looks like the NAM going for an MCS overnight Sunday night in Kansas. The GFS did indicate that yesterday, and likely we're going to see that become a pattern for early next week. MCS is going up at night in the Central Plains and moving into parts of Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, and Texas late in the evening. And I would expect more development the next evening. Yeah, in fact, there it goes right there. So maybe for Monday night, we're going to see Oklahoma and the Red River get some activity. Elsewhere, yeah, looks like some weak frontal boundaries in the Great Lakes. But that's about it weather-wise. Maybe something trying to come together in California, but we shall see. Okay, that's about all I got for this weathercast. Just as a reminder, next week is going to be supporter-only week. I really haven't done enough for the people supporting this webcast. About 20% of our regular viewers are supporters, and we're going to do something special for them next week. So for our supporters, we're going to take a 3-day break and return on the 23rd. And we'll have some special content and some tutorials and in-depth stuff. If you're not a supporter, you can still get in on that. Let me put up the link. You can go ahead and subscribe, and we will get you all set up. Otherwise, we will return on the 30th. All right, so hope everybody has a great weekend. Take care, and we will talk to you on the 23rd for the supporters and on the 30th for everybody else. Have a good one. Bye-bye.